Hi, Elizabeth.
So I tested it out a couple times this morning. The video's lagging a little bit, but I had audio on it, so hopefully we can at least get audio this time.
Hello.
Hi, Senator Lee. How are you?
Good. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Is that your office at the legislature, or are you at home?
I'm at home.
Okay.
I'm my law office.
Okay.
But do these headphones work okay? Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. I just started using them. This starts at 12?
It does. We're gonna spend a couple minutes, just it takes a minute to jump over to Facebook Live,
Okay.
and we'll wait for Representative Davis to come on. I think he had missed that first email with the Zoom link, so I emailed him this morning to make sure he has it okay.
Okay. I'm going to drop off for about 3 minutes if that's okay, and I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, so same thing. So when it asks me to we're gonna take video and audio off. When it asks me to unmute at 12, I'm going to say hello and then say short message from our sponsors, Cape Fear Realtors, and then video and audio off again, commercial, and then put this back on, right?
Yep, and then I'll end this.
Thing.
That's right.
All right. I guess it's possible, like I said, Ted Davis, I didn't hear back from him after I sent him that Zoom link again.
Okay.
So, you know, if he jumps on later while we're talking or something.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be sure to push him over to a panelist if he jumps on late.
Okay. Good afternoon. To turn video off here, or audio.
There he is.
Okay, perfect. Hi, Representative Davis.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Ken, yes.
Good.
Can you hear us okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Fine.
great. So this is Elizabeth from our team. Apologies, the resend that Zoom link kind of late, but I'm glad you got on okay. She's going to run everything from the back end. The way we'll go is right around noon. She'll move us over. Our thumbnails might be visible before we start talking, but she'll move us over, and around noon, I'll give a brief intro. Certainly, I was just kind of give you guys a heads up of what it'll look like in the beginning, but I'll say a very brief intro, and then we have a 15-second video that will play from Cape Fear Realtors for a sponsor ad, and then it'll come back to me, and I'll set up our talk, our conversation. I emailed you all it's just kind of we don't have time, I know, to get into everything, and hopefully we can check in later, especially as the budget talks start going, but just kind of a broad overview of what some of the big issues are that have come up, like I emailed to you guys, and in particular, any local legislation that has already been introduced or you guys plan to file. I guess the deadline's already come. Film incentives bill, Senator Lee. I checked in with Representative Butler since she couldn't make it for a personal conflict. Just the first question I'm going to ask, and just so for a heads up, I'll toss it to you first, Representative Davis. But the first question will just be like, what's some of the main priorities this year, however you want to answer that. I asked her the same thing, and she was talking about her House bill for the about the water quality bill. So I might just read a quick excerpt from that since she couldn't join us. And that's it. Then we'll get into some specifics. If I see any reader questions that come through, I'll toss them over to you guys. But do you have any questions? We'll just make it conversational for the next 20, 25 minutes. And feel free to, jump in if someone answers and someone else has something else to add or pop in, feel free to make it a discussion style as well. And we'll just talk for this lunch hour. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Any other questions? Little technical notes we sometimes remind people is if you have your email up, to either mute it, like, your Outlook will ding, either close it or mute it. Otherwise, the video will keep popping to you even when you're not talking, because Zoom will just go to whoever's speaking. Same with the phones. We've had a couple speakers who've come on and their phone's buzzing or ringing, and it'll move the camera or the Zoom camera over to you, which you don't necessarily want, but that's about it. Anything else, Elizabeth?
Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off everyone's video and mute everyone just as we move over to Facebook. And then once we get started with the interview, I will just remind you to unmute that and turn your video back on. That's it. So we'll go ahead and move over.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's Wilmington Biz Talk from the Greater Wilmington Business Journal. I'm Vicki Eckenrode, editor of the Business Journal, and we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor, Capeville Realtors.
Hello, I'm Ann Gardner, CEO of Capeville Realtors. Realtors support this program's efforts to connect our community in meaningful dialogue with actionable insights. Realtors are dedicated professionals who build strong, resilient communities and businesses. Work with someone you can trust. Work with a realtor. Learn more at capefear.realtor.
So on this week's Wilmington Biz Talk, we're doing a check-in with Raleigh and our local legislators who are in the middle of the session right now. They've been meeting and have a lot of meetings since the beginning of the year and have a lot of work to do this session. Of course, everything from passing the state budget to individual bills on key issues to redrawing the political maps this time around because of the new census. So we'll check in on some of those things as well as bills and spending that affect the Cape Fear region, from film incentives to line items for the universities and schools. So to provide us that check-in today, this part of the session, we have joining with us Representative Ted Davis and Senator Michael Lee, both of whom are part of the local delegation and represent New Hanover County. So Representative Davis and Senator Lee, thanks very much for joining us today. And just to start off broadly, and then we can get into more specifics, starting with you, Representative Davis, can you fill us in a little bit about what you think the main priorities are for this year's session?
Well, I can tell you what my main priorities are. Number one is trying to get funding that was included in last year's budget that was vetoed by the governor and therefore was not done, such as state search and rescue, which includes our Wilmington Fire Department, Fort Fisher State Historic Site, so they can complete their project to expand. C-Tech Vocational High School, which is a wonderful vocational high school here in Wilmington, money for them to help expand. The Wilmington Pilot Project, Treat Opioid Overdose, which has been a tremendous success in trying to help those that are addicted to opioids to being able to face that problem and overcome it. And also a new one that was not included in last year's budget that I'm seeking appropriation on is money for the food bank. Our local food bank wants to expand its facility, and I'm looking at getting funding to help them do that. There are other issues. There are so many issues that are faced, I'm sure, as Michael can tell you in the Senate, that you really is hard to pinpoint what's the most important, because there are so many important things going on right now. And I'm sure that we'll touch on some more of those later in some of the questions that you ask.
And Senator Lee, how about you from your perspective in your chamber? What is the key issues you think for this year and also for you individually?
Yeah, I agree with Ted. A lot of it has to do with budget items that really were thwarted because we didn't have a budget in the last couple of years. So in addition to that, one of the big things I've been working on is that we passed, and now schools are reopening here actually next week, was the reopen bill to get schools reopened. We have passed a massive statewide literacy bill to change the way we teach literacy in North Carolina. That was bipartisan effort between the House, the Senate, and the administration, the governor's office, as well as DPI and the state board. Increasing the Teaching Fellows program, not just dollars, but the number of schools. So there are a lot of education related items. On what I would consider a local level, obviously film. I'm also trying to, I dropped a bill and hopefully we'll get that money in the budget for the Isaac Bear planning money to work between UNCW and New Hanover County Schools to actually plan what that might look like and where it would be located, as well as some other related projects at UNCW, the library, and some of the other things that are going on back on the campus. One thing that I co-sponsored a bill recently is the Flood Resiliency and Prevention Act. And although it deals with a lot of upstream type issues, in addition to funding a one-time appropriation of $20 million to essentially create a mitigation, resiliency, and prevention plan, it also allocates $5 million recurring so that there's money there to clean out a lot of the streams that are upstream from us that creates a lot of issues for us here in Hanover County. But as Ted said, there's just a lot going on. And as we get into this call, we'll probably think about a number of other things both of us are working on.
And we should point out that the governor's recommended budget has already come out, and actually we should have a story coming out on that soon this week from the Business Journal, looking at some of those specific line items that affect local institutions that both Representative Davis and Senator Lee mentioned. And real quick, I wanted to also point out that if you're watching today's interview on our Facebook live stream, you're welcome to post comments or questions on the feed there, and I will pass those along as we have our conversation for the next 20 or so minutes. I also invited Representative Deb Butler, who's a Democratic representative from our local delegation, to join today, but she couldn't because of a personal scheduling conflict. But I did ask her that same question, so I wanted to quickly share a bill that she thought was of key importance for her that she's working on right now. And so Senator Butler has introduced House Bill 444, which deals with water quality and specifically PFAS, which she says is an extension of the legislation that was passed in the prior session. And while the former bill, I'm going to go ahead and read from her statement of what she's summarizing as terms of a key issue from her as well. So while the former bill held polluters and chemicals in particular liable for alternate water sources for those people whose drinking wells have been contaminated with perfluorinated compounds, including Gen X, my bill would make the logical extension of that and hold polluters accountable for the technology that our providers of public water are having to employ to remove PFAS from our public water services. She adds that she hopes that it will get a committee hearing, but it has not yet done so. So just wanted to share that part with you because that's another obviously issue that has been discussed at the state level for several years now. I know not discussed as much since COVID-19 took precedence last year, but something that I guess is still going to be debated or possibly discussed in Raleigh. So while we're on that topic of water quality issues, is there anything along that area that you, Representative Davis or Senator Lee, are planning to talk about or discuss this year?
Well, on the Senate side, I've introduced the 2021 Water Safety Act, and what it does is it continues the work of the NC PFAS network, which does all the testing that occurs all across the state with respect to water sources, both whether we're talking about surface waters, rivers, or we're talking about groundwater wells and things like that. In addition to doing that, it also funds, because one of the biggest issues we have with PFAS is it can't really be filtered out effectively. And the first Water Safety Act from some time ago that Representative Davis and I worked on came up with pilot money to test granulated activated carbon, which worked to a certain degree. What this 2021 Water Safety Act does is it funds testing at scale of a new technology that UNC has developed in order to filter out between 80 and 100% of PFAS, depending on the materials they end up using in this particular filter. What that will do is it will, this testing works in the lab, and they want to see if it works at scale for both a water treatment facility like we have here and also in another part of the state. And since they've patented this technology, the $15 million or so that is invested will come back by way of licensing or royalties to the state if it works. And the scientists all think it will work. And this is actually a model that can be used for other types of technologies where our UNC system needs investment to prove their concept. They have a proof of concept, but take it to scale and then utilize in industry. So that's kind of what we're working on, making sure we're monitoring, but then also finding a solution for filtering out PFAS.
In addition to that, Michael and I have introduced companion bills, meaning identical bills, he in the Senate and I in the House, to address the foam that firefighters use, which is very pollutant. That particular companion bill does not address the fire foam that the firefighters presently use in practicing. So I'm looking either amending my bill that was filed in the House or doing a separate bill that will address not using that foam even when the firefighters are practicing, because still it contains pollutants that can be dangerous to us. Also, I was interested, and I have sponsored a bill that is going to look at remediation involving Tex-5, which was a plant that was near Fayetteville that was in operation until 1999. And there are all types of pollutants in that particular site. And it's been discovered that that is moving underground towards the Cape Fear River, as well as a water treatment plant in Fayetteville. And this bill will allow an appropriation to be done so a study can be done to see exactly how far that pollution is going underground, because we certainly don't want it to reach the Cape Fear River and then come downstream to affect Wilmington. So there's still a lot of things that are going on concerning the issue of water quality on the Senate side and the House side. And of course, we're going to need to work together because it takes both chambers to pass a bill in order to get it over to the governor and get it signed into law.
And Don Harris has posted a question that's on another very coastal topic, but is asking, where does the state stand on consistent funding for beach nourishment?
Well, it's good you've asked, and I'll let Michael go first if he would like. He's introduced a bill in the House, and I'm a sponsor on a companion bill. He introduced his in the Senate, and I am a primary sponsor on the companion bill in the House that will address that very subject. And I'll let him go into more detail, but interesting, it involves proceeds from the D-stamp excise tax. But Michael, if you want to go ahead and expound on that, that's fine.
Yeah, so as folks know, when you buy or sell real estate, there's typically an excise tax, deed stamps that are paid. And I think around 2011, 12, I don't recall exactly when, the money used to be utilized for parks, recreation, and other types of non-general fund type issues. In 2011 or 12, those funds were redirected to the general fund. So what Ted and my bill does is it takes that money and puts it back kind of to where it was supposed to be before, and a percentage will fund parks, recreation, a percentage will fund beach renourishment, those funds will go specifically into the storm damage mitigation fund, which we all know as beach renourishment. If we're able to get that done, there will be a stable source of funding that goes into the storm damage mitigation fund, for which the various coastal communities across our state will have the ability to draw down upon. The reasoning by adding beaches to it is the beaches are our parks here in the eastern part of the state. It also helps to get folks in the western part of the state to help support the bill.
Yeah, and tourism is such an important aspect of our economic development in New Hanover County, and that's why beach nourishment is so important. But it's also important to remember that this fund isn't going to totally fund beach renourishment. It's extremely expensive. As you're aware, the federal government has chosen not to continue funding our local beach projects, and we're working on that. But also, not only with beach renourishment, I previously worked on legislation that got funding for shallow inlet dredging. That's also important because when you have tourists come down, not only do they want to enjoy the beaches, but they want to be able to get in their boats and be able to go out and fish and have ingress and egress to do that. So I think it's great that we have a funding source for the shallow inlet dredging. I think it's mutually important, and so happy to see that we're moving forward on a steady funding, although it won't cover it all, source for our beach nourishment.
Okay, and let's move from beaches to film. Senator Lee, can you give us the latest about where your bill stands and what it's recommending in terms of film incentives for our area? Or not our area, I should say, for the whole state, but obviously a growing, rebooting industry for our area.
Sure. I'm just going to rewind a little bit of history first. As everybody knows, Representative Davis and I worked really hard to convert the non-recurring funds to recurring funds. And what that means is, and this was previously back before the pandemic, what that means is that the dollars that are there now, $31 million, is built into the budget, and every year it will be there in the budget. And why that's so important is because previous to that, it was non-recurring, which meant it had to be put in the budget every single year. If that had occurred 2 years ago when the governor vetoed the budget, there would have been zero money in film for the last 2 years. So what we worked on so hard in 2018, even though we had no idea we weren't going to have a budget, those recurring dollars were important for that. And it was also important because it enabled those who were looking at our area to know that the funding would be stable over a period of time. Because if you're filming a television series pilot, you want to make sure that you can continue that if the pilot's picked up. And because it was recurring, that was an important piece of the puzzle. And that's why you see, among other things, a lot of activity today. The bill that I dropped not too long ago was for non-recurring dollars. And that is because we are seeing a real uptick and we want to continue that. And the reason, so the other money will still be there on the recurring basis of 31 million. And then the 34 million is the non-recurring that we're really trying to get. Because what that does is it really helps out the industry, but it really helps out a lot of parts of our community who were hurt the most. Hospitality, whether we're talking about hotels, restaurants, and a lot of those service providers that were essentially shut down during the pandemic. So those are non-recurring dollars, and that's really just over a 2-year period, but we still have the recurring that is in there as well.
What's so important about having recurring money is that when a film company is looking at a project and they say they want to come to Wilmington, they are not going to invest unless they know that the money is going to be there because it's their business. And these projects, they might start years in advance, scouting, looking at different places. Is it the right place to go? Is it not the right place to go? So that as Michael said, that was very important. Another thing that is good at this point and is helping with the amount of money in our film grant was there was a move last year to actually decrease the money for the film grant. And I fought very hard and was successful in fighting against that, and it did not occur. And one of the ironies of the budget that was vetoed by Governor Cooper, it actually helped the film industry, not only because of the fact we had the recurring funding that Michael referred to, that we were able to continue having, but there was going to be some of the film money taken away because it was not obligated to a particular film project and to be used for other things. And because that budget was vetoed, that did not occur. So you had that surplus amount in the film grant plus what is being funded per what we have now. So actually the film grant was in excellent shape starting out as far as the money that had in it. And the film industry is taking off. I was talking with Bill Vassar, the local CEO at Screen Gems, and they are busier than they have been in years. And we were just hopeful that it'll keep going. It'll keep going. And not only because of the projects that we presently have, but there are companies that are interested in coming here for new projects. And that's fantastic. And it's not just Wilmington. You've got other areas in the state, Charlotte and other areas in the state where people are interested in coming and doing filming. So I think it's great because it's a clean industry. And Michael alluded to it, it's the trickle down effect. People that work in the film industry, they can afford to go out and buy houses. The film business itself, they buy lumber, they rent cars. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. So it's a very important economic engine in our region.
You both mentioned having to work hard on those funding bills before for it and fighting for it last year. Do you feel like there's support there for the changes, for the measures for this year that Senator Lee's proposed?
In the House, I will tell you that film is like the redheaded stepchild. There are a lot of people in the House that don't like incentives. And because they consider this to be an incentive, they don't like it, no matter what it's about. There are others that just don't care about the film business. I'll put it this way. I've never met anyone in the Senate or the House who has filming done in their district who isn't in favor of them because they realize, the benefits from having it. Whether or not the House will go along, if the Senate does include Michael's latest bill, I can't promise that because once again, I've had to fight dog you have no idea just to keep where we are the last 2 years. So I honestly don't know how open the House is going to be about that at this point.
Yeah, and on the Senate side, the makeup is not unlike the House. I mean, it's a tough road, and you're really swimming upstream because of the reasons that Ted mentioned. Hopefully, we will be able to, if we don't get the amount that I put in the bill, hopefully we'll be able to get an amount that will be enough to be helpful. But it's something that Ted and I have to work every single session to really maintain and continue the messaging about how much it does for the state.
Okay, and while we have both of you here, before we run out of time, let's make sure we get to at least address a couple major topics for the session. One of those being redistricting once the 2020 census information comes out. Can you give us a sense of where that stands and what you expect those discussions to look like? I know that's going to be just a major point, especially looking not just in North Carolina, but around the country in terms of political district maps for future elections.
We've discussed it some in the House. Of course, nothing can be done until the census is done. And right now, the projection is that it might not be till October until the legislature can address this. And that really creates a problem because filing for the next session biennium starts in December right now. So that has a lot of ramifications. In fact, if it's that late, I mean, we may have to put off filing, all kinds of different stuff. So, and that could affect primaries, it could affect general elections. So I'm not sure what Michael can tell you what's going on the Senate side, because I don't know, just like he doesn't know what's going on the House side. But really nothing at this point has been done.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing on the Senate side that's been done. We haven't even really, talked about it because without the numbers, and knowing when the numbers will come out from the census, there's really nothing to schedule or talk about. So the concern is that we won't get the numbers until it's pretty late in the process, and how that will impact the next round of elections.
And also on voting, a number of state legislatures, not just in Georgia, but many states are taking up changes to voting procedures and voting qualifications. What do you see happening in North Carolina on that?
Well, from the House side, I'm on the elections committee, and we have met concerning some issues, but we really haven't gotten down into weeds. I was also on a policy study committee concerning elections that has met, and we're also looking at things that we can recommend to the election committee. So nothing definitive has been done at this point, but I think you will see some moves by the Republican majority to address a lot of the concerns that we had on the last elections. In particular, the fact that mail-in ballots were allowed to come in, was it a week or so after the election day? Just things like that to try to make it more efficient. I just see a lot of room that we can have for improvement.
Yeah, I'm not on the elections committee in the Senate, so I'm not entirely sure what reforms might be proposed. But the changes that were made for purposes of the pandemic were only existed during the pandemic. So I think some of the issues may just resolve themselves because they've expired. And then I think there's some other issues that Representative Davis kind of referred to or alluded to that the legislature may look at to see if they can make sure that every vote really does count, and that we make sure that the process works according to what the law provides.
Okay, and COVID-19 relief measures or any other legislation that addresses recovery from the past year was another area I wanted to touch on. And that actually leads into a question that Holly Childs has posted, who is executive director of Wilmington Downtown Inc. So she's specifically asking about the impacts of the pandemic on downtowns across the state. So she's asking, is there anything being proposed this year to help downtown businesses, particularly those focused on food service, bar, breweries, and hospitality. And as both of you know, we have a very large hospitality industry locally. So are there any measures on those industries? And then also to round us off, just any other COVID related bills that are being discussed or seem to be moving forward?
Well, I can say from the House side, and it would also include the Senate because they passed both chambers. We've done some major COVID financial relief for the state, and it's not over. There's additional funds that can be used, and that's really above my pay grade in the fact that I am not one of the chief appropriation chairs from the House. My bailiwick is judiciary. And so really when those bills come out is after the main appropriation chairs have looked at it and come forth with recommendations, then they bring it out to the rest of the legislature and we look at it and decide on whether or not to pass it or not. So I can't tell you right now definitely what specific items might be done in the future, but I know that there will be things that are still on the horizon to be done.
Yeah, I agree with Ted. I mean, there are a number of things kind of percolating around, and most of it's going to be surrounding the budget. I introduced a bill that actually came to me from someone who operates a restaurant in town. When they were required to shut down in March on very short notice, they decided that rather than pay the sales tax on time, that they would pay their employees, and that caused them to accrue penalties. And the Department of Revenue said they couldn't waive it. So I put forth a bill that said that so long as the sales taxes were paid, and the failure to pay was a direct result of the pandemic, that the penalties would be waived. On the education side, there's a significant amount of funding that has come through and continues to go through. In fact, the ed chairs on the Senate side, we all just, the two ed chairs, and then Senator Davis, not Representative Davis, but Senator Davis on the Senate side introduced a bill that relates primarily to education, because I'm an education appropriations sub chair. So there's a lot still going on. We're early in the session, even though it feels like we've been going a million miles an hour. I mean, it really feels like we've been in session for 6 months, even though it's been a short period of time, because of a lot of the COVID relief type things, not only with the federal government, but those things that we're looking at on the state level that will find their way into the budget bill, which is still in process.
And we will definitely check in with the delegation later on in this session, particularly around the budget as those talks start happening. But Representative Davis and Senator Lee, I want to thank you both for your time today to give us this initial check-in. I know we covered a lot of major topics in a short amount of time. But these are all things that we'll be following throughout the session. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a story coming out soon that gives the highlights of some of Governor Cooper's budget recommendations, what's in his spending plan, including some of the local spending items that were included in the governor's recommendations. And also, if you are catching on to this late, or you want to catch up on previous interviews, including last week's talk about vaccine question and answering, or discussions about how the housing market's going, you're welcome to always check us out at WilmingtonBizTalk.com, or look for our podcast wherever you stream your podcasts at. And we'll again be back next week with another topic and another check-in on local issues. Thanks very much for everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.